Welcome to day 4. I am really excited with today's programming. We're focusing on the sort of early part of learning the language and then translating your first book. So Ellie Fleming is a good friend of mine, and she's just finishing up her degree in history and German, and she is the current editor of The Scribe. The Scribe is a University of Leeds creative arts zine which publishes anything creative that can be put onto paper. I wonder who came up with that slogan. Don't know her. So she's done a wonderful job, and if anybody would like to buy current issues of The Scribe, they are more than happy to she is more than happy to post them out to you. They're only £3.50 an issue, and it's really worth your money. We talked a little bit about her learning German, in particular about Harry Potter and about the use of books you're really familiar with when starting to learn a language. We also talked about the difference between German spoken in Germany and German spoken in Austria. Austrian German, I guess it is, and it was really interesting to hear what she had to say about that, and it's essentially a very different language, which I never realised entirely before. Then we had a good chat also about a few films and other ways in which, if you're looking to improve your language, you can do so. Then I had a lovely chat with Jay Ockenden, the translator of Snow Dog Foot. This is Jay's first book, and I couldn't believe it was anybody's first book, because it is just beautifully written and beautifully translated. It's a stunning book set in and it's also stunningly gross and stunningly dark in a really satisfying and interesting way. There are many different ways to read this book, and I really loved it. I actually couldn't get enough of it. And so Jay talks a little bit about their experience translating a whole book for the first time, especially freshly out of a university experience, where obviously you get marked and you get feedback on how well you're doing, whereas you are supposed to be the authority when translating a full book. It was very interesting. So that talk is split into two. So the first half we don't have any spoilers as to the book's plot, and the second half we get a bit more into exactly what happens. But don't worry, we make it very clear when that happens. So if you decide that you do want to buy the book, which you definitely should, and you should definitely order it straight from Pyrini. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about a publisher called And Other Stories. I just want to highlight them before we get into the programming. So I first came across And Other Stories with their book by Yuri Herrera. This is one of, if I had to do your sort of top 10 books you've read recently, this would be in the last, so I read it about a year ago now. I've since read all his other back catalogue that's available in English. It's wonderful. This book is about migrating from Mexico to the US, and it's about borders more in general. It's a wonderful story, and I love all of his work, and I think he is a writer who deserves to be read by everybody. So And Other Stories also have published this book, Captain of the Steppe. Captain of the Steppe is kind of in the lines of your Catch-22s, so he was highly influenced, Oleg Pavlov, by the guy, what's his name? The guy who wrote The Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Now, Gŵyl is a literary festival. There is a certain member of the team whose Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was not their favourite book at all. But it's a combination of the two. This is, he was the only influence in that it's about a Kazakhstani prison, and he's just trying to plant some potatoes, and it's not exactly like Catch-22. He's no Yossarian, it's not the same character, it's not the same, it doesn't have the same flow, like it's quite a different feeling book, but it is the same in that you have an army, and you have an army's hierarchy, and you have the sort of Catch-22s and the no-win situations and the ridiculousness, and it's in the same critique circle. Could not recommend this enough, really. I highly think you should check it out, and I think you should just go check out everything and the stories published. I love everything they do so far. So yeah, I think I've got quite a stack. Maybe I should show them. No, I won't show them. Ellie Fleming, let's go.
Hello. Hello. Hi, Ellie. Like we just haven't been speaking.
Classic.
So this, in case you are unfortunate enough not to know, is the wonderful Ellie Fleming. She is the current editor of the, I would say, world premiere zine, The Scribe.
Wow, that's bold.
Called Leeds premiere zine, if nothing else.
Yeah.
She is also currently literally in the middle of her exams, finishing up her degree in German and history. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah. Although I just finished the history part yesterday, so...
Well, the German part's the part that matters anyway.
Exactly, it's more important.
So I thought I'd get Ellie on to talk a little bit about what it's like learning another language, to talk about, we've picked up a few similarities between lots of people, in that I have here with me a collection of my sister's Harry Potter books in different languages.
How many languages is that?
I think we've got Portuguese, Spanish and French. She studies Portuguese and Spanish.
Wow.
So, and when I first approached Ellie about talking today, the first thing Ellie said was like, oh, I don't know if I've got much to talk about apart from Harry Potter. So that's what I thought we'd focus on, because it is really common that people, I think, start with Harry Potter. So I was wondering what you think the thought process behind that is and what you've got from it.
Well, basically, because I study German, and like for as long as I've learned it, people always say you should read in German because like that's a really good way of learning. But it's also really daunting. Like it's really also I find it when I'm reading a book, I really want to know exactly what's happening at every point. But when it's in a different language, you can't spend the whole time looking up every single word because it just takes too long and you lose the will to live, basically. So it was kind of Harry Potter was a good option because you wanted to read, but you also wanted to know what was going on. And I'm one of those people that knows them inside out. I'm actually listening to the fifth one of them. No, I just finished the fifth one this morning, onto the sixth already, obviously. And I knew them inside out, so it was a great way to get into it and know the gist of what was going on and pick things up. For example, I didn't know the word for broom, but I quickly realised what that was because it came up so often. And they're just great. Like whatever language you're reading them in, it's like a home to go to. So it was just an easy choice for me. And like the first one's really it's not a long book either. I mean, if you went straight in with the fifth, yeah, that would be quite a big task. But I think the first Harry Potter is a really good starting point.
I've heard that they're actually quite difficult books to translate because a lot of the words are made up but have their roots in sort of a word pun. So, you know, like just things like Quidditch, people's surnames, that kind of thing. And then Hagrid's accent, I've heard, is also quite difficult to translate because he brings because he has such a distinctive accent to us, and like there's a lot that comes with the way he speaks that you understand instinctively. So I've heard different stories about sort of translators having to find parallels in their own country.
That's so true. I hadn't actually thought of that. It kind of I seem to remember like lots of basically just letters dropped off, like just because there's just like a more relaxed way of saying a word. Is the equivalent to, is it like a West Country accent Hagrid's got?
I think it is. I think
kind of, yeah. Yeah, that's true. I kind of can't picture what actually he sounds like in the books in German. But also I lived in Austria last year and they've got a fairly weird thing, so maybe they just gave him an Austrian dialect.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what was it like living in Austria? What are the differences between Austria and Germany?
I will happily talk about my amazing year abroad last year, which I'm really missing right now. I as part of my degree, I had to go abroad. Ugh, what a chore. And I chose to go to Austria because I really liked skiing, and I just thought what a good opportunity to go and live in a beautiful country. But a lot of people had told me that they did have an accent, and I just always thought like, well, it will be fine, like it just will be fine. And then I got there, and I remember sitting on a bus on the way to the place I was going, which was very small. Like I specifically asked to go to a smaller place because I knew that then I'd have more chance of speaking more German.
I can confirm that Ellie's photos from this year are just Ellie in like Sound of Music costumes on the middle of mountains.
Like literally, I actually bought a Sound of Music costume. I had to. Yeah, it was very small place because I wanted to speak more German, and it did work. That was a good decision. But I remember sitting on the bus as I was on my way there for the first time, and there was some like school kids behind me, and I just remember thinking like, oh, they're speaking like Czech or something, like they must be speaking a different language. And then I heard like a couple of words that I recognized, and I was like, oh my god, that is supposed to be German. Like that is the language that I'm now going to have to try and understand. And yeah, it was a really strong dialect. For example, so if you want to say I have in German, you say ich habe. And or if you want to say, yeah, I had, you'd say ich habe gehabt. And they said ich hab gehabt.
Oh my goodness.
So I was looking up this word like K-O-P-T, thinking that is what they were saying, and it was gehabt. Like it was just a whole different world. But once you tuned into it, which I did fairly quickly because I was so exposed to it, it got a lot easier. And I'm actually really glad I am really glad I went to a place with a dialect, because it just is more interesting. Like it's its own character, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there would you go back to Austria, or would you be interested in learning more about other dialects?
I really want to go back. I really, really want to go back. And that's kind of my answer when people ask the dreaded, what are you going to do in the future question? But I'm not sure in what capacity. So when I went last year, I was teaching, which I loved. And I'd happily do that again. But the problem is I can't really plan right now because no one can plan right now. So I'm just sort of winging it. But no, I definitely want to go back. And then the question is also, would you go back to the same place? And to be honest, I probably wouldn't, because it had its own thing, and I want to see that in a different place. I want to see like the differences in living in different places. And it was like a really small, there were 5,000 people in the town. It was surrounded by mountains. It was beautiful. But I'd maybe like to go to a city or a slightly bigger place, or just another really small place in a different part of Austria. And also I feel like I've kind of got a home there anyway. So I can always go back there. I might as well try and set up another home somewhere else. Spread myself out. But no, I definitely want to go back. It's just a question of how and when. Maybe like an au pair or something like that. I just think now's the time.
It is. It absolutely is. Is there any advice you'd have for people who are looking to learn a language? Where would you begin other than Harry Potter?
That's a good question. I don't know if do you know Duolingo?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
have a strong 2 weeks on that.
I actually got a 2-year anniversary email the other day.
Yeah.
But I haven't been on it for about a year, so I don't know how that works. So I do German, but I also in first year you could do a thing called a discovery module, and I did Italian from scratch, and Duolingo was great, although you get some weird sentences. Like it'll be like, I am an apple. Like that's the sort of thing you learn. Duolingo is good because it's quite like a good way of, you're kind of motivated to keep going on it. Other ways by which, music, oh my god, music. And the thing is, it's quite sad because there's not that much good German music. That's something that I'm really sad about. There's a couple of good ones in Austria that I found, but it's in comparison to other languages. For example, French music I love, and there's so much of it. But yeah, but music's a great way to get into it. So for example, at the moment, I don't know do you know Christine and the Queens?
I have heard of them.
Oh my god, I'm so in love, like so in love. But she's a French artist, and she sings a lot in English but in French as well. So she's a good person because you kind of get a bit of both. Music I think is one of the best ways, and podcasts. Although podcasts can be quite daunting because there's quite a lot. It speaks so quickly, but then there are slow versions. Like there's a thing for German, there's a website, if you want to learn German, there's a website called Deutsche Welle, and they do like slow spoken news, so it's much easier to follow, and often with a transcript underneath. There's so many, that I think that's the amazing thing about the internet now, is like the number of resources there are that are just like endless. So it is quite easy to learn a language nowadays. If you are committed, you do have to be committed.
Do you also think, because I'm not bilingual, I speak a little bit of Welsh, but not really. And Spanish has always been the language that I've really wanted to learn, but I've never do you think that do you think that being in the country helps a lot, or do you think how high on importance would you situate professional teaching yourself, and being in the country of the language?
So yeah, that was actually one thing I didn't include, which I should have, is living there. I think it's because it's not that easy to do, to just casually up and move to a different country just to learn the language, but being in the place, exposed to it, like, is the best way. But you've also got to do it right. So for example, if you move to Berlin or Vienna, it would be much more difficult to get a grasp of the language, because so many people speak English there, want to speak English with you, and it's just quite easy to gravitate towards English people, because there are so many of them. Whereas I honestly didn't have an option but to speak the language, because apart from the teachers in the school, so few people spoke English, and so it was quite a leap of faith to go to a small place, but thank God it paid off for me, because I did just speak way more German than I would have, because I had friends who went to Vienna, they had an amazing time, but they just gravitated towards each other, and they didn't really, they wouldn't say that they felt particularly integrated in the city like that. So yeah, that's the other thing. If I went back, I'd kind of be going back to get better at German, so a city might not actually be the best place for that. But it's a scary thing to do. It doesn't just come easily, moving to a different country. But now I really want to learn French. I just want to move to France. Just like up and go. Yeah.
So the book, obviously, when people think of Austria, the first book comes now that it's Swiss, it's absolutely Swiss. It's Heidi, and it's just 100% Swiss. And I just realised as I was about to say it, oh good lord, should I even be doing this? Of German language books, because my understanding is that Heidi was written in German, I think. And then translated. So that is really, I have also read a book called The Muscle Feast by Bridget van de Beek, which was wonderful. But what are your favourite German books, or books in translation, or books you've read in German?
So I it's kind of difficult because when I've read things in German, I've had to, like, as in have been part of my degree. And actually literature isn't a massive part of the degree in Leeds. There's a film modules, but there's not so much literature. But I did read a book in second year called Der Kameramörder, which is like it's translated as the camera killer. But I think if I read it on my own terms, I maybe would have appreciated it more. But it has no punctuation, or very little punctuation in it. There's no paragraphs and there's no chapters. So that was a particularly challenging one. But also I felt quite proud when I read it, and it did win quite a few awards, so that was a good one. I think my favourite, which I'm reading, I actually haven't finished it because lockdown happened and then I moved home and forgot to bring it with me. But I'm reading The Kite Runner in German. Yeah.
Oh yeah, love that, but like I haven't read it in German.
It's great because I can't quite remember. I read it when I was younger and I can't remember what happens. So it's quite good because I'm reading it and going like, oh, but it's in a different language, and it's not the same as Harry Potter. It's not a cop-out. Harry Potter is a bit of a cop-out because I just know what's going on, even if I don't understand the vocabulary. So yeah, I'd probably say The Kite Runner. Plays, there's some good German plays. We did one called Der Besuch der alten Dame in sixth form, actually. It's like the visit of the old lady. And there's obviously people like Brecht, who's the playwright, and he's just like, well, I was in a play by Brecht actually at school, which was really cool. But no, I'm ashamed to say that I haven't actually read that much German literature, because it's quite a big task to go about reading something in German. So I've kind of only really done it when I've been forced to.
So maybe the sort of takeaway is that familiarity can really help with language learning.
Completely.
That you start with your Harry Potters and then move to your Kite Runners, and then in the future, German literature awaits in the future.
Exactly. And there must be so much I'm just unaware of it. I feel like also speaking to people, getting recommendations from people in the country, like friends I've got in Austria saying what would you recommend, because they would obviously have recommendations. But yeah, start familiar. That's definitely a good tip, and then work your way up from there, for sure.
Is there anything else you'd like to add for people who are maybe entering university or are just sort of starting out on the world of like learning a language and translating and
Oh God.
Have you enjoyed your time at uni?
Oh God, amazing. Yeah, I've absolutely loved it. And it's just really sad how it's ended. But no, I've absolutely loved it. And I think studying a language at uni has been a particularly like special experience, because you are forced to go abroad, which I mean like is one of the best things you can do. As much as it might be hard at times, it really is amazing. And I just say be committed. It's like it's the feeling when you can speak a language, or when you can even just order a beer in a different language, is like immense satisfaction. And like think of that when you're sat there trying to learn adjective endings. They're horrible. They're horrible.
Just think of the beer. Just think of it. Maybe that goes to the festival too. Just pretend you're at the festival.
Exactly.
A beer.
Exactly.
Thanks so much, Ellie. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
No, thank you very much.
Bye. Hi. Hi. Ellie and I were just having a chat, and we just thought that this point was really worth bringing back up, because Ellie was talking about her year abroad, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, so basically I wish I read more in German, but for me, like an important thing about reading is the momentum with which I read a book. So I'll like when you read something in quite a short space of time, it's like a quick romance. Like you always want to go back to it and like
the joy of romance books. Like
yeah.
You are fully in it and swept away by it.
Yeah, exactly. And like when you're reading something, quickly, like I'm reading, I don't know whether what's it called, Tipping the Velvet. I'm reading at the moment. Oh, it's Sarah Walters. It's so good. And I really want to go and read it. Like I'm really inspired to go upstairs and just pick it up. But that's harder to get with a book in a different language, because it just is harder work, and you kind of have to be committed to sitting there and concentrating on it, or even looking at words while you're going. So when I was on my year abroad, I read loads. I read absolutely loads, but English, because of the momentum of it. And yeah, it's something I loved because I got through so many books. But I wish I'd made the transition to reading some in German, because I think the more I'd read, the easier it would have got.
I just think this is a really useful point to sort of encourage us to forgive ourselves, that like if you're beating yourself up about not reading enough books in a different language, like there are very understandable reasons why, like obviously, like, and sort of acknowledging that like it is going to be harder to get the momentum, I think might be a good thing we should all do. And then maybe we'll actually make it easier to read if you say like, oh, I know why I'm struggling right now, I'm not getting into this because I'm not in it. So
exactly, momentum's key. Also, I forgot to say, watch films in different languages, because you can watch them with English subtitles and just hearing it will help, but also then you can move on to watching it with German subtitles and then without. The films also
watched such good Brazilian films recently. There's one called Neighbouring Sounds on Mubi. For anyone,
I've got Mubi. I've got it. So good.
So good. If anyone is interested in what we're talking about, do check out Mubi. When I signed up a few months ago, it's £3 for like 3-4 months, and they have just opened up their whole library. So they had like a sort of 30-day. It's fine. You can go check it out, get what they're doing. But I would highly recommend Neighbouring Sounds. It was a fantastic film. It was like I describe it as being on a really good night out. Because that's how immersed you are in all the noises, and it's sort of it was just not a film for like every occasion. I think I recommended it to a friend and he watched it with his house, and it just didn't go down very well because they were in the mood for like a Friday night film. But for a fuller immersive experience that is really transportative.
What was it called again?
Neighbouring Sounds.
Neighbouring Sounds. I'm gonna write that down.
So thanks again for tuning into this extra little bit here. Bye.
Bye.
Secondly, tonight is Jay Ockenden, who's an absolute delight to talk to. They called in from a houseboat that was currently docked at Canary Wharf, which I very much enjoyed. And they also recommended me a book at the end. It's not in this video clip, but after we finished recording, we were having a chat, and I just filmed with Amy, who was on yesterday, about Italo Calvino, and obviously Jay studied Italian, so all things linked. So we were talking about Calvino, and Jay recommended that they thought I would like Invisible Cities, which I have now ordered and which I am so excited to read. So I cannot wait for you to see this talk. I really hope you enjoy it. I certainly did. And here we go.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to another evening at Gŵyl Festival. With me today, I'm very excited to be talking about this little book from Pyrini Press called Snow Dog Foot. It is so wonderful. Also, the title, well, I'm sure we'll get into the title later, is what everyone remarks on first, and it is a direct translation of the Italian title, so there's no playing with that there. Without further ado, Jay is a translator. They are currently studying for a master's in Montreal?
Vancouver.
Vancouver. No, it was Canada. And also, this is their first book. So, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also, if anyone's interested, Jay is currently on a houseboat in Canary Wharf. So, what these places we go.
I don't know if you can tell, but that is legitimately a porthole in the background there. That's why it's round.
Amazing. So I was wondering if you'd start with a little bit about you. And you obviously studied Italian. Was translating something that you were always interested in pursuing? And then, yeah, how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I did French and Italian at university, and as part of that, translation both into and out of both languages was a big part of the course. I took a special module in advanced translation which covered some translation theory, and also gave you the opportunity to basically attempt some really, really difficult texts. So what do you do when a text is all slang or if it's nonsense? One of the great things I love is people have done things like they've translated Jabberwocky and other kind of nonsense poetry, and that really kind of pushes the boundary of like what translation is and how you do it. So that was enormously fun. I loved that. And so I was interested in translation, but I was also very used to doing it as part of this kind of seminar format where you did your week's homework and you handed it in and then someone marked it and gave it back to you. So to transition from that to being a professional translator was really unexpected. I didn't really know how people became translators. And it's very odd to go from, I suppose anyone who's studied something and then gone on to do it professionally has this weird moment where they're kind of waiting to get the marks back or to be corrected. So yeah, I suddenly found myself translating a real book. But yeah, it's something I've always really enjoyed. It's the exact right amount of creativity, I find, because you basically get to write a book, but someone else has done all the difficult work for you of actually coming up with a plot and characters, and you just get to fill in the words. Yeah, so it's certainly something I've enjoyed for a long time.
Was this how different would you say? So this book has a really distinctive tone and narrative voice, I'll maybe do a little bit of plot. It's about a man who is isolated and lives in a hut up in the Italian Alps, and throughout winter he's completely cut off. So you are really alone with this man for the whole book. And therefore he has a very distinctive style. Was that something that you feel is the same in the Italian and in the English translation, or was that something that you sort of had to reinvent? Reinvent.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There is definitely, you notice the difference between like his voice when he speaks and the voice of the narration, because the narration is often quite eloquent, but he's like very taciturn and often doesn't even speak in full sentences. So those sorts of things are, I think, fairly easy to recreate. People speak broken English and they speak broken Italian. I think the one I find interesting, he's like reasonably sweary, I think. And I think the swear words people use say a lot about them. So you have to kind of decide what sort of vocabulary you're going to give someone. And yeah, I always think that's quite, and especially in, the other thing, of course, is there's a lot of difference between like British English and American English. Yes. So this is definitely like a British English book. So an American person would read it and find it really English. It's always a bit peculiar. So I think you can't help but write in your own voice and use language that comes naturally. I always think translation is a bit like theatre, because you have to sort of imagine people delivering the lines. So I think it's, that's the kind of test, is if it was a script, would someone be able to read those lines and does it sound like a real character? But I think people who know me would probably read the book and say, that's a you thing. And I go back and forth a bit about how I feel about that, because some people think translators should be completely self-effacing. and that the perfect translation, people use the metaphor of a pane of glass, so that you just see through to the original text with no intervention from the translator. There's not even like a little like bubble in the surface of the glass to make you realise that it's even there. I think I disagree with that sort of approach, partly because I think it's completely impossible to do. There is no seamless translation. You're always reading words the translators chose, and their personality is always going to be in it. So I think that's something you shouldn't really try and escape because it's inevitable. So I think it's actually the author wrote me an email after publication saying, I've just received a copy of our book, and that was really, really, really touching. So it's really pleasing to me that he thinks of it that way as well, that a translation is a kind of collaboration. So there's kind of, I feel like there are allowed to be a few bits that are maybe mannerisms or habits or particular favourite words that I would tend to use. So I think probably there are a few bits in there that are kind of my voice, but at the same time I try to do the kind of, what's the word, kind of immersive theatrical thing of, you know, imagining yourself into the character and then trying to speak in their voice.
It's a really beautifully written book, and I was really, like, in all compliments, I was really surprised that it was your first translation when I learned about that. And so you came to write this book through the Pyrini Prize, which, so do you want to talk a little bit about that and how, because I know, actually I happen to know that several of the people watching are sort of at maybe a similar point in life that looking at something like this might be useful for them.
Yeah, if you are like me, someone with a background in languages, interested in translation, asking yourself the question, how do people become translators? I still can't really answer that question properly because for me it was basically magic. The Pyrini Stevens Translation Prize was set up precisely because it's very difficult for people to get into translation, because usually you have, I mean, most publishing houses have like their little group of translators that they always use, and you go for people with experience. So it's just quite a hard world to break into. And specifically to address that, they created a prize for new and unpublished translators. So if you've never had a full-length work of translation published, you're eligible to enter. It's a different language every year. We've had, so the first year was Italian. This year I think it's Swedish. Oh, I should know that. But they're going to keep rotating, I think, through different languages. And the way it works is they publish an extract, they invite people to send in sample translations of it, and the prize, there's some prize money. You get to go on a writer's retreat, which is amazing. You basically go on this incredible holiday and do some translating. And you also get the contract to do the book, so you come out of it with a published translation. So that's how I ended up doing this book. It was just an extraordinary experience. It's kind of a dream come true. I don't know how you become a translator of more than one book. When I find out, I will let you know. I'm working on that.
Did you feel a connection with this book in particular? Like, do you think there was something about it that suits your style? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, like I think, you know, to some extent there is skill in translating, and some people are good translators and some people are less good translators. But also, you know, you might be a brilliant translator of Proust and a terrible translator of Diderot or whatever.
yes.
I'm really trying to avoid using the word vibe here, but there are just authors you vibe with. And I think I like this book a lot. It's my sort of thing, I think. Back in university we got to have a go at doing lots of different styles, and I know I'm not very good at, I mean, I like translating from French, but I often find French harder, and there's a certain sort of, we did practice passages from Proust, and I would be an awful translator of Proust, these long, floaty, delicate, nuanced sentences, whereas there's something very earthy about this. It has a bit of poetry to it, but it's quite understated. It's not kind of highfalutin. It doesn't kind of disappear off into, and the sense of humour, I think I find it really funny, and so I was having a great time. I mean, it's kind of embarrassing, but I was making myself laugh and having fun with it. So yeah, I think definitely, you know, compatibility with a book is the most important prediction of a good translation.
Yeah, I think I entirely agree. And it's one of those things where when you have a translator, multiple translators working on an author's body of work, you can, so there's, do you know Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto at all?
I know Banana Yoshimoto, but I don't know Kitchen.
So I loved Kitchen, and then read one of her other books. It's called Am I Right? And I never vibed with it, and I guess there was always a little bit of me that wondered, you know, obviously maybe it's just not my book, but maybe there was a little bit like maybe it's a different translator, you sort of the way that you, yeah, so
yeah, definitely.
I'm
sure that's true.
So we're going to get a little bit spoilery now, so if anyone hasn't read the book and really wants to, please check out now, and then come back and listen to our book club style discussion about it. So here's your opportunity.
All right. Goodbye.
I really, really dig this book. And one of the reasons I think I related to it so much is that, so when his obvious mental health, he's obviously not a well man, and there's some indications that this is because of his childhood trauma and stuff like that, and so isolation of the war and the electric shocks in particular, and it is obviously sad how it ends. I found it kind of liberating, because I don't think it could have ended any other way, and that almost that, like, I didn't want him to go to his brother, and I didn't want him to be saved, because, like, I actually think that he was being liberated by not having to conform to, like, he couldn't survive in the world. So I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely know exactly what you mean. And I remember showing, because I got lots of friends of mine to kind of proofread individual chapters. And I remember one of my friends kind of saying, "This is just so sad. I just feel so bad for him." But what I kind of love about the book is it doesn't want pity. The character doesn't want pity. You're not really allowed to feel pity. Anytime you feel like, oh, is this going to be a heartwarming, sentimental story about a crusty old man who's like softened, and, you know, him and his dog, the dog's going to get through to him, something really horrible happens just to jerk you out of it, and you're like, oh, no, this is not a wholesome and charming tale. They're just going to sit here eating dirt. Lovely. But I really like the fact that there's this rejection of pity, rejection of helplessness. I mean, I'm sure in a real situation I would be exactly like the ranger. If I knew someone who was in that situation, I'd be turning up being like, "Do you want to come down the mountain? Do you need a cup of tea? Do you need a person to talk to?" But I think there's something quite patronising and even self-indulgent about that sense where you're like, I'm going to be the hero in this story. I'm going to be the good Samaritan. I'm going to rescue him and look after him. And he doesn't want that at all. And I think often people don't. I'm sure, like, the ending situation of him just in a hole in the ground lying there, it's not ideal. It's not what you'd want. But I think I think you're exactly right that there is something, yeah, I don't know if liberating exactly, but there is a sort of vindication in just doing the fact that he does exactly what he wants, even when it's awful, even when it's directly against his self-interest, even when it means killing the only person in the world who kind of likes him. There is a sort of horrifying kind of freedom to it. And I think that's I think that kind of goes with the whole mountain ambience, where you can't sentimentalize a mountain, you can't bring it indoors, you can't sort of domesticate it. It's just a big, craggy, rocky, sometimes beautiful, sometimes horrifying space. And I think that's why I think he is a sort of mountainous character. So yeah, I know exactly what you mean by the ending being almost weirdly satisfying.
Yeah. Side note, do you have a theory on who the cadaver is? Did you have a way that you read it?
That's really interesting actually, because that was one of the questions. I did a virtual book club with the Borderless book club with Pyrini, and that was one of the discussion questions. And I felt so strange saying it genuinely never occurred to me, because sort of as a translator, you know, that's not my job, that's the reader's job. And the only thing was to ensure that it was as ambiguous in English as it was in Italian. I mean, I remember reading books the first time, and I got to kind of have all of these moments. The moment where you think it definitely is the ranger, and he has this like false memory of killing the ranger, and you're just kind of tense to that, and you think it's all going to be a kind of police procedural almost, and they're going to find him and he's going to evade justice, and then the whole thing flips and you realise he actually hasn't, or possibly hasn't, done anything wrong. Yeah, I mean, I think you could read it a lot of different ways. There were some fantastic theories advanced in that book club. People were saying they thought it was representative of like buried trauma resurfacing, that it might be someone who'd been killed in the war and preserved until the moment.
That's my theory. That's my
you.
theory. That's me, and that's also what I think it is. I think because I think that references to war, like that, just makes sense. I don't know if I've just been reading a lot about like I think in Robert McFarlane's book Underland, I think there might be a dead body that comes out, and maybe I just read that recently.
I mean, there's also the theory that kind of the whole thing might be a figment of his imagination. By the time the corpse starts talking, we're clearly, you know, well into his peculiar world. It could be. I mean, I can't quite let go of the idea that he might have killed someone.
Yeah.
You know, he's always talking about the backpackers who come and try and buy cheeses, or that's a kind of strange moment. So I like the horror of not knowing, where it's just equally plausible. He might be a blameless old man who's just grumpy, but he also might have just killed some random tourists and not felt any compunction and even forgotten about it, which is the worst thing, that he could just, like, it could be so irrelevant to him that he just kind of let it go. So I like the uncertainty, I think.
Do you find that moral, what I find really interesting is that when reading that and you go through these phases of, because he is such an unreliable narrator, of thinking, oh, he has killed someone, he hasn't killed someone, maybe he has. And as you go through that, I actually felt that like, oh wow, like, does it actually matter to me if he has or hasn't? Because clearly he's not able to sort of hold normal social norms, and obviously doesn't make murder right, but it also means that we're dealing with a different situation. Like, and I was questioning whether my moral judgment should be changing so much of him, when really it's the exact same situation the whole way through, with regards like his own moral standing. I don't know, what did you think?
Yeah, no, that definitely raises some big philosophical questions, partly about responsibility. Because I think when you think that he did kill someone, you're very quick to sort of think that even the very fact he's so confused about it means he can't have known what he was doing. So it's quite easy to kind of exculpate him. But then, yeah, there's almost like a weird disappointment to discovering that the ranger's still alive. It's a very strange emotional reaction. And I think you raise a really good point about like how we think about responsibility, and if someone, the fact that he thinks he did it and doesn't feel any guilt at all, clearly indicates that he could do it, might have done it, might do it again in the future, has no problem with the basic idea of murder, goes on to kill the dog, who is as much of a human as any of the other characters in this narrative. Yeah, I think it does force you to. Yeah, I think it's interesting that certainly my sense of it was that it doesn't feel as though you're on very shifting ground. You just kind of take him as the awful, sort of endearing.
Endearing if you forget whilst reading about the crustiness.
Yeah.
I do find that I do that, especially in this book. I love the physical grossness and the physical description, but I did sometimes forget about them in the more endearing parts. You sort of like, maybe your mind sort of blurs them out a little bit.
I think the author's always like, he doesn't let you get away with that for too long. Like, you're never allowed to have like a nice moment without there being something slightly like uncomfortable in the background.
Was there any particular challenges with translating any of that? Was anything sort of descriptive wise difficult?
I think partly the geography was really difficult, and I found notebooks where I've like tried to draw it all out, because I was trying to figure out, because there's the valley that he and his brother own, which isn't quite the same thing as the Conker, which is the little valley where his hut is, and then he's also got the other place where he goes up to in the summer, and is that still part of his land? And also, like, does he even know where his land begins and ends? Because it wouldn't be like, he thinks kind of the whole mountain is his. And so trying to be really clear in English when we just have fewer nouns is quite tricky, because you end up just saying the valley next to the valley, by the valley, up from the valley, but down from the valley. So that was tricky. There was one bit, I mean, the bits that there were some quite funny bits I struggled with, and had to do surveys of lots of my friends. There's a bit where he's standing on a precipice and he talks about like the way, like the effect of gravity specifically on his testicles. And I was really confused about that, so I asked like 5 people I knew who had testicles to describe like what any effect standing on a ledge would have. That was some interesting conversations.
I think you nailed it. Like, I think you nailed it. I think that's as close as I will ever come to like understanding what it would be like.
Well, that is truly the greatest compliment anyone has ever paid me. I think on the whole, the other thing that can be a bit tricky is actually something that was really interesting is that Italian doesn't really distinguish between like he, she, and it, because objects can be masculine or feminine. So any feminine object is basically a she. So should the dog be a he or an it? Because in Italian it's just a he, but that could equally be interpreted as being an it. And that was really interesting. And I tried it one way, I tried it the other, swapped back and forth a few times, looked at it too many times, had to go away and do something else, kind of went a bit pronoun blind. And in the end, we actually agreed on a thing where the dog is an it until it starts to speak. And then it's a he for most of the book. And then right at the end, the dog kind of stops speaking. And in some weird way, it's as though Adelmo has one imaginary interlocutor at a time. And that kind of shifts over to the corpse. So then the dog sort of stopped being a he and went back to being an it, almost like in a video game, like a non-interactive character. And then the corpse suddenly becomes an interactive character, having previously been an object. So I think right at the end, the corpse is a he instead. I don't know whether anyone reading it kind of picked up on this weird little pronoun juggling, but and that's kind of, that there's no sort of precedent for that in the Italian because there is no sort of pronoun equivalent. But I thought that was quite an interesting potential addition to the storytelling, that this idea that sort of objects or non-human things acquire humanity but then also kind of lose them again, a bit like a switch going on and off. So yeah, anyone who did notice that, you are very observant, you win a prize.
That is so interesting. I think that must add so much, because you really feel the dog just kind of dies and you don't even like, you're like, what, like, when did that happen, aren't you? And I think that must add to that, because you do the dog, the narrative switches from the dog to the corpse, and so that's when the dog dies almost without any ceremony or without the same interactions you'd be used to.
Yeah, there's a line in it somewhere about like he says something but the dog doesn't reply because it's just lost the desire to speak, almost like a kind of protest. But it's not quite clear if it's like lost the desire to speak or lost the ability to speak. Was the dog ever speaking? Was it a magic dog? Was it just a hallucination dog? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the description of hunger in it, because he is going through the most extreme physical. He's starving. He's not eating very much for months, and then he is literally starving for a sort of what feels like it goes on forever. You just keep wanting him to like get down to the village and get some food, and I wanted to hear what was that like to write? Was that difficult? And what did you draw on?
I mean, I suppose in some ways, you know, all of the heavy lifting there is done by Claudio Morandini. I mean, the Italian is beautifully written, and I have to say I'm in the privileged position of never having experienced that kind of hunger. I've never been hungry for more than about an hour. So, I mean, I'm certain, like, everything that you find in the text comes, I think, there from the Italian. Yeah, at some point they become kind of anthropomorphized, and he argues with hunger and cold, and that was really interesting. I mean, I'm the kind of person, like, I've got quite a literal mind. So, you know, when you watch a film, and they say something like, we only have enough food for an hour, or, you know, we only have enough air for an hour, and then the film lasts for another 3 hours, and you're like,
yeah.
You know, I remember kind of trying to work out if it was still within the scale of realism, and how much time elapses between them running out of food and when they first begin to find the, like, defrosting stuff. I also kept getting really anxious about the fact they were eating, like, decomposing meat. But yeah, it is, I don't know, yeah, I know exactly what you mean, that there's this sort of tension that you're just waiting to see what happens, and this, like, constant threat that one of them will eat the other. And
yeah, you're definitely doing those calculations, like, how long can you survive without food for again? Like, how long's it been? Definitely.
But they've got plenty of, they've got the water, but yeah, the kind of the description of, like, just, like, searching for crumbs, and then there's a bit where they're still kind of pretending that they aren't. I think there's a moment when he starts looking for crumbs, but he's sort of looking as though he's dropped something maybe, and the dog has to be like, oh, sorry, I ate them. Oh, did you want them? You know, there's kind of almost like social convention politeness that they have to get out of the way first, and then they're like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to go and, like, lick the manure in the stable because I've reached that point.
Oh, it's something. How do you think that the book relates to time? Because it has definitely a timeless aspect to it. What's your impression of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the book is very deliberately vague about when it's set, where it's set. I mean, we can sort of identify that we know the main character has to have lived through the Second World War, but that's only because we understand what, like, he only ever refers to, like, men in grey overcoats, so it's deliberately really vague. And I mean, because it's in Italian, we assume it's the Italian Alps, but I don't think that's ever specified. I mean, because they speak to each other in Italian, you assume that's where they are. But really, there's no reason why it couldn't be any kind of mountain anywhere. So I was trying to be a bit conscious of, you know, using language that wouldn't date anyone too strongly to a particular period of time. So, like, the interactions in the shop, for example, feel sort of old-fashioned, but not to a point where you could pin it down and say, this is really from the 1960s. You know, no one says it anymore. So trying to kind of pitch that in a way that didn't kind of give away a particular temporal link. And I mean, they have helicopters and radios, but there's no mention of any other technology. I was like, you almost believe it could be, you know, 2010, and just they haven't, you know, that particular pocket of the world is gone.
And it was very believable that it was that pocket of the world. Like, it's very believable, isn't it?
And I think I mentioned this in book club interview, but I did this. I did the translation with a supervisor, the fantastic Jennifer Higgins, who's also a translator with Pyrini. But she was my kind of mentor and go-to person. But we had this interesting thing where in the Italian, it always, when he talks about running and hiding from the soldiers, he just says that he's a giovane, which means a young person. It's a bit like someone saying when I was young. And that could be anything from when I was 5 to, you know, when I was 25. And we'd formed really different impressions. Like she'd pictured a boy, I'd pictured like a young man of kind of military service age. So that was one of the questions I did actually ask the author about. And he said he'd imagined him being sort of probably like late teens when that happened. So you can, from that you can sort of date, oh, he must have been about 20 in about 1940 and so on. But I think it's deliberately quite untethered. And the other thing I love is you've got no idea how old he could be. I mean, he could be 60 and losing the plot, or one of those incredible wiry 90-year-olds who just keeps going mostly out of spite.
Which definitely does seem to drive him slightly.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, from the very beginning, you have this there's this lapse where he doesn't believe he's been down to the village, but then he's been there last week. So from kind of page 3, you're like, right, never trust anything this man says about time. And
that keeps the tension so high throughout the book because that's so early established, and you never know if you're safe or not.
Yeah, and the bit where he suddenly asks the dog how long the foot's been there, and he's like, how many years has it been? And that seems to be the moment where it really sinks in for the dog, and the dog's like, oh, okay, you are not keeping track of this at all. So yeah, it is, I suppose, again, what we're talking about with on the one hand, you're really tracking, you know, month by month, week by week, how much food do they have? But on the other hand, a bit of you is like, it could be 3 years, it could be 2 days, I trust nothing this man says. It was really, really funny when the book was first read by the editors who hadn't read the original. It came back with loads of corrections for repetitions or contradictions. They'd be like, this seems a bit redundant, should we take it out? And I'm like, no. That's because, you know, he'll say, oh, I need to get potatoes, and I should get some potatoes. Oh, and I need some wine. Also potatoes. And, you know, I can see how that reads as like, initially just a kind of compositor's error, and it took a while to be like, no, that is all very, very deliberate. There are all of these weird like repetitions and unnatural kind of things that come back and back and back, so it felt quite important to keep all of that, even though I think the first time you come across one you kind of look back up the page because you're like, surely that can't, it's got to be a mistake, right?
Yeah, you absolutely do. Is there anything that you take from maybe that editing process, or anything that you learned sort of going forward into like your next translating? Like,
I mean, I learned something about myself, which is that I cannot punctuate. It's really funny. All of the edits that came back and were like, I think this should be a semicolon. I was like, yeah, sure, do what you like. But then anything where it was like, I think maybe not this word, I'd be like, oh, well, the thing is, I think this has connotations with that, where I think that implies, I think I would definitely say, I don't know, majestically rather than triumphantly, and I'd, you know, spend 10 minutes arguing that, but then we'll be like, I'm going to take out every full stop, is that fine? I was like, yeah. So I think I definitely need to, and if you've enjoyed the punctuation at all credit to the editors, that is nothing to do. So yeah, I think for future translations I'm going to try and learn how to punctuate. There was definitely, and you also notice things that are just habits, like it's not at all a sort of translation decision, but where you put adverbs, whether you instinctively say boldly he walked in, he boldly walked in, or he walked in boldly. And I think everyone just has a sort of rhythm that they're most comfortable with. And I didn't realise until someone kept moving the adverbs and I kept moving them back that that's a kind of turns out there are two types of people in this world, and you're one of them. But until someone edits you don't know that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I definitely, even in you just saying that, I know which one I prefer. Is there anything you'd like to plug, or you can go follow Jay on Twitter? I have enjoyed your Twitter.
Yep, by all means, feel free to join my Twitter. Yeah, I remember when I won the prize, Pyrini said in a kind of very professional way, you know, oh, let us know what your social media profiles are so that we can promote you there. And I was like, I should make some social media profiles. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. What do I promote on Twitter? Occasional bits of journalism.
A bit of Morris dancing, I saw.
A bit of what dancing?
Was it Morris dancing?
Oh yes, because I've been in Canada, and I wanted to make, one of my favourite things about North Americans is that they don't know about Morris dancing, so you get to break the news about Morris dancing for the first time. And I'm from Oxford originally, where we take May Day really seriously, and it's this whole very strange pagan day and lots of drinking and lots of middle-aged people kind of like giving in to their sort of Wicker Man pagan fantasies. So yeah, I tried to explain Morris dancing to Americans, and if that seems like your idea of a good time, I'm J Ockenden, I think, on Twitter. Yeah, currently, sadly, nothing to plug unless you're looking for a translator.
Well, you heard it here first.
I don't know.
Thank you so much for chatting. That was really interesting. I really enjoyed it.
It's been a delight, and I will. Yeah, I might even have to get Instagram just so I can enjoy the rest of this series.
I'm also putting it on YouTube. This is new. Well, this is new to so yes, it'll also be on YouTube. You can also watch it there, so you don't have to get another social media handle.
I'll keep an eye out. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think part of the reason I vibe with Adelma Farandola is I think we all have a bit of an inner hermit, and certainly not being on that many social medias is part of my commitment to hermiting.
Absolutely right. I'm gonna stop recording. There we go.
Thank you so much for coming and listening to another day. It's an absolute honour, and thank you to all the people who are being so generous with their time as to let me interview them. I know that these times can be difficult in more ways than one. Tomorrow we have Will Dawson, so you'll get to meet him, the creative associate of Gŵyl Festival. You'll get to meet him properly. We're talking about The Plague by Camus, because there's a plague. Predictable. We had very different experiences of the book. I didn't finish it, but he loves it, so we're going to have a little chat about that. And then, very excitingly, we have Dr. Julie Curtis, who is a fellow at Wilson College, Oxford, and a professor in Russian literature, and we talk a little bit about this guy, Evgeny Zamyatin, who is one of the most influential writers in the field of dystopian fiction, and is also not necessarily always recognised and known for his large influence. Orwell was a huge champion of him, and Orwell also based a lot of 1984 on him in the best way. It's standing on the shoulders of giants. So it was so interesting to speak to her. She an interesting story, an amazing story about one of those academic experiences you can only dream of finding a first transcript just locked away where nobody had seen it for years and years. What else did we talk about? It was really fascinating. I know a fair amount about this book, and I learned a huge amount from her, and a huge amount. I think it's also a really interesting talk just from a historical point of view. So I cannot wait for tomorrow. See you all there.